Don't you just love the weird names of British foods? Bubbling Squeak, Rumbledy Thumps, and of course, Toad in the Hole. And that is what we're making today. A 19th century Scottish recipe for Toad in the Hole. So thank you to Crowd Cow for sponsoring this video as we look at the history of the toad, which in this case is actually Scottish beef. This time on Tasting History. So next week, here in the US at least, it is Father's Day, and I was racking my brain on what to get for my dear old pa. He already has more Hawaiian shirts than you can shake a stick at, so I was kind of at a loss. And then it hit me harder than Robert the Bruce hit back at the Battle of Bannockburn. I could make a video dedicated to him for Father's Day, based on our Scottish heritage, something that we both really enjoy. So that's what this is, but first, our recipe. So this comes from the cookery book of Lady Clark of Tilliprony, and is for the vague toad in a hole rather than the more specific toad in the hole, but it's basically the same. Toad in a hole. Mix a good batter of 2 or 3 eggs, some sifted flour, milk, and a little salt. Put some of the batter into a pie dish, lay a tender rump steak on it, well seasoned, and then pour in the rest of the batter. Bake it to a nice color, taking care it does not burn. So anyone who is familiar with this dish will see that the toad, or the meat being used, is rather different than what you'll typically find today, at least in England. In England, it's usually sausages, but in older recipes, especially from Scotland, it tends to be beefsteak. Also, because we do have modern day recipes and other 19th century recipes, we can see that Lady Clark likely left something out of this recipe, and that is to put some grease or oil into the pan and get it really hot before adding the batter. Because if you don't, it doesn't rise, and really then it's just toad in the swamp. So we're going to do that. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 3 eggs, 1½ cup or 180 grams of flour, 1¼ cup or 300 milliliters of milk, a pinch of salt, 1 pound or 450 grams rump steak. I had to roll my R. Rump steak. Beef tallow or oil, just enough to cover the bottom of the dish, and some seasoning. Now, she's not specific in what seasoning to use. I'm going to be using just salt and pepper, but I think that it would be a good idea to use some fresh herbs or dried herbs, something to really kind of give it some spice, you know. That's Scottish food. It's known for its spice. Anyway, batter up. Crack your eggs into a bowl and whisk them well. Then sift the flour into a large bowl and create a well in the center. Pour the eggs into the well and gently incorporate the flour. When the batter becomes too stiff, start adding the milk in a bit at a time and gently whisk until it's all incorporated. Then whisk in your pinch of salt and then set the batter aside. Really, it needs to rest for about an hour so that the flour can absorb all of the liquid that it's going to absorb. And while that rests, preheat your oven to 425 Fahrenheit or 220 Celsius. About 10 minutes before your batter is ready, set the dish with the oil or tallow in the oven. You want it to be sizzling hot when you add the batter. Now when it comes to the meat, you've got a few options. She just says to lay a rump steak in there. The rump steak is huge. It's going to take up the whole thing, if not more. So I would either slice the rump steak or cut it up into little bite-sized pieces. That's actually what I'm doing. Either one is going to work. Now you can use pretty much any rump steak, but the rump steak that I'm using is a fancy rump steak. It is Wagyu beef sent to me from today's sponsor, Crowd Cow. Crowd Cow is a marketplace for high-quality meat and seafood. They have beef, pork, poultry, fish, and even game meat like boar and venison. And the cuts available range from the typical to the atypical, the ones that you're not going to usually find at the grocery store. Each cut is vacuum sealed, frozen at peak freshness, and sustainably shipped to your door in recyclable boxes packed with dry ice. In addition to Wagyu, Crowd Cow sent me buffalo skewers, Alaskan cod, and wild-caught Alaskan rockfish. The rockfish was sustainably caught by Tennessee in Alaska, and it was delicious. So click the link in the description, crowdcow.com/tastinghistory for $15 off of your first order, plus an extra 5% when you become a member. Membership is free. But wait, there's more! For a limited time, Crowd Cow is offering free items added to the box of new members. So just click on the link to see what's being offered right now. So like I said, the rump steak that they sent me is Wagyu. Rather fancy, especially for toad in the hole. So this is a fancy toad in the hole, which gave me an idea because a few weeks ago I did an episode on placenta, the Roman cheesecake, and I put a call out for people to send me images of Porky Pig dressed in Roman garb. Watch the episode, it'll make more sense. And it was like my favorite thing of this entire year so far, is all of the wonderful pictures that people sent me. And then I shared them on Instagram and Twitter, and I think a few here on YouTube as well. So I would love it if people would send me pictures of a fancy toad in the hole to my Instagram, Tasting History with Max Miller. Now, whether you slice up your steak or cut it into pieces, once it's seasoned, go ahead and give it a light searing in a frying pan and then set it aside. Then it's time to assemble our toad in the hole. Now, working quickly but carefully, pull the dish out of the oven and pour about half of the batter into the dish. Then set the meat in the dish and cover with the remaining batter. Then close the oven and do not open that oven door. Not you, not your cat.
Not nobody, not know how!
The moment that you open that oven, it will start to deflate. And nobody wants a deflated toad in the hole.
It's not that common. It doesn't happen to every guy, and it is a big deal.
Now, as I said, this episode is dedicated to my dad, who is quite proud of our Scottish heritage. And that is not going to be the last of my bad Scottish accent, so buckle up, buckaroos. Now, we hail from the Maxwell clan, which is why I am wearing the Maxwell tartan apron that my dad actually got me. Now I'm realizing that I'm actually wearing two tartans, and that's a little tacky, but you know what? It is what it is. Also, Maxwell is where I get my name, Maxwell, though my brother says that it's from Maxwell House Coffee, which, although that actually might be true in a way, I refuse to accept that narrative, though he did somewhat redeem himself last Christmas when he bought me a 1 square foot lairdship in Scotland, making me Laird Maxwell. I like that. Now, I'm not going to go into the Maxwell clan history, though it is rather interesting, but my ancestors do play a bit of a role in the history that we are discussing today. The Scots love cows, always have. From the adorably woolly Highland cattle to the Aberdeen Angus, which is now found all over the world. Now, the obvious reason to love cows is because they're cute. Look at him. But they're also useful as beasts of burden and sources of milk, cheese, leather, and meat. And in Scotland, one thing that made them so special was that they could walk. In medieval Scotland, cattle were a great source of movable wealth, and that is where my ancestors come in, because it turns out the Maxwell clan were quite the cattle raiders, border raiders, actually, so it was mostly the English they were raiding, hence, instead of shameful, it's a badge of honor. But Scotland was infamous for cattle raids not only across the English border, but also within feuding clans, like in the infamous raids of Urquhart. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Shirts in 1544, the Cameron clan doubled down on their victory by raiding Clan Grant's castle and taking 100 cows, 100 calves, 40 young cows, and a bunch of other livestock. But being on the border with England, the Maxwells preferred to take their cattle from the south and were known as reivers. I've always thought that like the people in Game of Thrones who are always kind of coming over the wall from the north, that's what they're based on. My family. Now, the raids were mostly carried out during the early winter months when the cattle were at their most plump, and then the Maxwells would skedaddle right across the border back to Castle Carlaverock. In a poem called The Raver's Wedding by Sir Walter Scott, he talks of the cows that the Ravers had taken and how they added to the wedding feast. And loud in Harden Tower, the quaich gaed round wi' meikle glee, for the English beef was brought in bower, and the English ale flowed merrily. Later writers like Will H. Ogilvy romanticized the Ravers, but in actuality, they, like the cattle that they had been stealing, were domesticated some centuries earlier. By the 17th century, most Scots focused more on raising cattle than stealing them. By the late 1600s, cattle drivers could take thousands of cattle down drovers' roads all the way from the Highlands, through Scotland, and into the market towns of northern England with relatively little fear of being attacked. Relatively. And this lasted until 1906 when the last big drove happened. After that, pretty much all of the railroads had replaced the drovers' roads.
They took our jobs!
Now, just like cattle ranchers everywhere, keeping your cattle safe was a full-time job. And even after rival clans and border ravers were no longer a major concern, there was a far more sinister enemy of the cow lurking in the green pastures of Scotland. Elves. Mentioned as far back as the leechdoms or the medical texts of Anglo-Saxon Britain, elf-shot was the scourge of British cattle. And what is elf-shot, you may ask? Well, they're invisible arrows shot by elves, of course, and sometimes fairies, though those were called Sayachiha, or fairy arrows. In 1867, a Mr. Hugh Morrison claimed to have seen a cow who had been murdered by fairies. When it was pointed out to him that the cow had likely just fallen in such a way that its horn had gotten stuck in the ground and that it had starved to death, Mr. Morrison said that that is exactly how a cow falls when it has been shot by a fairy arrow. And in 1884, a farmer claimed, "I've gotten an ill job this morning in the death of a fine stirk by elf-shot." When asked if it could have been due to illness, he said, "That couldn't be. My neighbour and me opened up the breast, and there was a hole through his heart." It's hard to argue with that. Now, while it's kind of silly and seems like something to be laughed at, the Scottish belief in fairy arrows and elf-shot had some real non-bovine victims. In 1662, Isabel Gowdy was tried for witchcraft, and supposedly, without torture, she confessed to cavorting with the king and queen of the fairies, and her confession has a detailed explanation of how they made elf-shot. "We sprang them from the nails of our thumbs. The devil sharps them with his own hand, and delivers them to elf boys, or whittles and ditties them with a sharp thing like a packing needle." Isabel was part of the last of the great Scottish witch hunts of the 17th century, and it's thought that seeing as she confessed without any coercion, supposedly, that it was possibly due to either mental illness or ergotism, which has a fascinating history and is definitely food history. It's something that make people go crazy, and I think I should do an episode on that, maybe around Halloween. Also, how messed up is this? Isabel Gowdy was put on trial for witchcraft, partly for making elf-shot, but in 1607, Barbara Patterson of Newbattle, Scotland, was also put on trial for witchcraft for trying to cure elf-shot, but she did it with a charm. "I charm thee for arrow-shot, for door-shot, for window-shot, for eye-shot, for tongue-shot, for her-shot and the maist, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Women just could not catch a break back then. But perhaps most insidious of all is instead of murdering these bovine by their own hand, these elves and fairies would force humans to do their dirty work for them, like in the Highland story of Black Donald. While ploughing a strip of land on the Isle of Tiree, he was swept up by a horde of fairies and flown over the Isle of Skye. When he returned, he explained to people what had happened. He confessed that he regretted nothing of his experience except that, at the bidding of the fairy throng, he had dropped from the eddy an arrow that killed on the Isle of Skye a speckled cow. And from that day until his death, the folks of Tiree knew Donald by no other name than Black Donald of the fairy throng. Heartbreaking. Now, the thing about when an animal died of elf-shot or a fairy arrow is that it never left a mark on the outside of the beast. Go figure. Instead, the symptoms tended along the line of bad milk, or they stop giving milk altogether, or lethargy, loss of appetite, or they start having seizures. And if caught before actually killing the animal, there were remedies to the elf-shot. Amulets hung about the cow's neck, or pages of the Bible waved over her back while she's made to sniff tar to induce coughing. Cold water poured in her ear, or one of my favorite Scottish remedies, which is sure to work, where the wise man boils in a clean pan a pound of gunpowder and a crooked sixpence. This is placed before the cow. She is made to drink the mixture. The gunpowder immediately blows the elf arrow out through the hole, and the sixpence, fitting on the heart, covers the wound made by the stone. If after the treatment the cow does not recover, she dies because God chooses it, and not from the elf-shot. That is from the General View of the Agriculture of Caithness from 1815. That is not that long ago, boys and girls. 1815. We have come so far, so fast. Though while many believed in elf-shot and their cures, there are some scholars who believe that the earlier mentions from like the Anglo-Saxon era are more metaphorical and tended to just kind of explain things like heart attacks and strokes, things that would kill people where there was no obvious reason of why they died. But since in those books they also mention things like hags and witches and stuff, I'm not sure that I can give them too much credit for not being at least somewhat superstitious. That's okay. But whether protecting them from elves or border ravers, cattle have always been a precious commodity in Scotland, and so it's no wonder that Lady Clark chose the Caledonian cow as the feature of her toad in the hole. Soon to be my toad in the hole. So at 30 minutes and not a moment sooner, unless it's burning and then a moment sooner, take the dish out of the oven and serve immediately. And here we are, toad in a hole. The outside looks nice and crispy, and the inside looks kind of gooey but done. Honestly, the only thing that could make this better is a nice glass of scotch. Well, there you go. It's a Father's Day miracle. Let's do this thing. That's actually really good. I usually don't drink scotch with things, but it actually worked with this. The meat is excellent. The dough is wonderful. It's soft and a little bit crispy, and yet maybe a little stodgy as well. But I actually don't mind it because the flavor is really, really nice. I'm going to try some of just the crispy bit here. That's my favorite part. I mean, it's Yorkshire pudding. What's not to like? I honestly think that, either doing it like this or with the sausages, either way is going to work, but do get a good meat because you do get a lot of the meat. It's not actually covered up with anything. That said, modern times, and actually probably in the 19th century, she just didn't include it, this dish is usually served with gravy, and a gravy would be really nice right now. I know Gordon Ramsay has a really good onion gravy recipe that he puts on his toad in the hole. So maybe I'll give that a shot. But essentially, Lady Clark's dish it's like a 19th century version of, I don't know, pigs in a blanket. That's kind of what it tastes like, but with good steak instead of hot dogs. So a happy Father's Day to my dad and all of the fathers out there, and make sure to click on the link in the description, crowdcow.com/tastinghistory for $15 off your first order, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.